In September of 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law Senate Bill 823, the realignment of California's Department of Juvenile Justice, effectively closing the state's juvenile justice facilities by 2023. The law seeks to end the troubled life of the DJJ, which at its height in the mid-90s housed 10,000 youths, and in the years since had been seen as little more than an apprenticeship program for further crime and imprisonment. Born from an effort to highlight rehabilitation over punishment, SB-823 originally folded the DJJ into the California Department of Social Services, an agency more able to provide the necessary outreach and programming at the local level for youths that otherwise would have been shipped off to state facilities. By highlighting locally administered, community-based restorative justice over punitive incarceration, SB 823 was heralded by youth justice advocates as a sea change in California's juvenile justice system. In effect, California was defunding the Department of Juvenile Justice. Then came COVID. In the budgetary debris field resulting from the pandemic, SB 823 was rewritten. Gone was the role the Department of Social Services would play. In the new version of the bill, individual counties would be responsible for the housing and rehabilitation of serious youth offenders, with the state providing funding and oversight. While many of California's larger urban counties already have the infrastructure in place to meet these new requirements, counties like Siskiyou or Del Norte don't. These smaller rural counties who live closer to the budgetary bone now have to create systems that meet SB 823's mandate within its limited per-offender funding model, as well as safeguarding the youths in custody and the community at large. All of which has led to much frustration among many of California's rural probation departments. Frustration voiced last March before the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors by Chief Probation Officer Lonnie Reyman.
If we can figure out how to provide equitable service for these kids, again, hopefully with the idea and the hope that we can change their behavior in the long term. That's what we're struggling with, and that's what we're trying to figure out. We don't have a whole lot of money to do it. We don't have a whole lot of time to do it. And frankly, nobody at the state level seems to care a whole lot about that.
Redwood Voice's Eleni Corcovelos reached out to Del Norte County's Chief Probation Officer Lonnie Reyman to find out how the county plans to enact SB 823.
So the state has offered like $125,000 per youth offender to offset programming costs and things at the county level that the state normally would have picked up. So the question here is, you'd think that the $125,000 isn't enough for counties like Del Norte to deal with this situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that. There is a small county minimum. When they were working on the finances, the 125 was the cost per youth for DJJ annually, and they settled on a small county minimum of $250,000 per year. For us, that's a lot of money, but on one hand, but on the other, when you're talking about trying to stand up a completely separate program with high-level providers, you look at counties that are slightly larger than us, like Shasta County, Butte County. They have on staff clinical experts, folks that can run those programs for the population in their home. We don't have that. We lean on either other governmental agencies like Department of Health and Human Services primarily, and then a very few other local resources like Remedy Vista, and they don't have the expertise to deal with a sex offender. They possibly might have the ability to sit down and work through issues with somebody convicted of a heinous assault or murder or something, but there's very few resources in that sense that we could structure some kind of contract where the money would be sufficient for them to come in and provide that, but yet have other things to do. It's kind of an intermingling of our low numbers plus the seriousness of the cases that we're dealing with that poses some of those challenges. But then you have the programmatic piece on top of that. In a sense, money isn't the issue. There are situations where we as a county, we have money to spend on things. We just can't find the people willing to come in at the price point we are able to offer, or just willing to come at all. Well, like I mentioned before, just finding mental health professionals that are willing to come and work in Del Norte County is extremely challenging. That is a constant struggle we have in our community corrections, whether that be on the adult side or the juvenile side. DHHS and mental health have struggled with that for years trying to find experts to be able to come in and provide programming and their services here in the community because, whether it's just the rural nature of where we're at or the price point that we can offer it at, it's just not attractive to people. And so I think it would be extremely challenging to stand up an entire system for one kid every 13 years. We could try and massage that somehow, but, no matter what the dollar figure is, trying to bring somebody in here and make it viable both economically and personally for people is a challenge. And I don't think that we'd be able to sustain that on a consistent basis.
Do you know what the current progress of a plan is for all of this that's happening?
Yeah, so the 823 laid out a process. There's a council, the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, that already exists. I chair that along with a number of other justice partners. The structure that 823 laid out was that a subcommittee of that council would meet and create a plan. We actually did that, and in the last 3 weeks, the subcommittee voted to approve the plan. So we actually do have an existing plan. And essentially what we put together is looking for other partnerships. So I've been talking to the chief in Humboldt County. Each county, again, is having to deal with this. And in Humboldt, they're expecting to be able to hold on to their own kids. Facility-wise, they're going through some changes that offer them the opportunity to have a facility that they can program and house these youth in, 707B youth, as well as for different programs, activities, things like that. They're going to let them commingle with their existing population with some things, but they've got the physical layout and structure where they're able to do that. Because of our low numbers and because we're so close in very similar communities, the chief there is willing to entertain some kind of contract or agreement where Humboldt County would at least take a look at our youth if the courts order a custody commitment. That'd be the first place I go. They're relatively close to home. We'd be able to facilitate family visit, re-entry when that point comes. We'd be able to get those kids out of custody back into the community with relative ease. Humboldt County may look at a particular case and say, we don't have the expertise or the programmatic needs for this kid. You're going to have to go elsewhere. And that's going to be the case with a lot of counties. And so statewide, CPOC, which is the Chief Probation Officers of California, that's our association. CSAC, the county association. So boards of supervisors, I can't remember the exact name. So CSAC, and then the County Administrators Association. We're all meeting together. There's a work group from each of those organizations to see if we can create a consortium which would operate as almost a facilitator of finding facilities that would take a case or a kid that had a high level of need, or a county was just in a spot where they don't have the resources like we do with Humboldt. You look at Siskiyou, Modoc, Sierra, none of those have juvenile halls. And it's very possible that they're not going to have a relationship like we do with Humboldt, a neighboring county, and they would have to go out statewide trying to find a place to put their kids. And so a statewide consortium where we've come together and laid out a structure for finding appropriate housing and programs for kids, where a chief like myself, I can call the consortium and say, this is the case I have, this is the kid I have, I need to find a facility. And through the consortium already identified a small number of facilities that are willing to take other counties' kids, and we can match up that kid in that case to the programs and resources of a particular facility and place that youth there. So our local plan, those are the two primary things that we're looking at. Relationship agreement with Humboldt County, and then if that isn't a good fit, then a relationship with a statewide consortium where we can find an appropriate cut.
Do you think that these changes will lead to more youth being tried in adult court then?
To say that we can come up with a way that prevents an increase in cases moving to the adult system, I don't know that it's fair for anybody to say. What we can do is try and come up with legitimate and reasonable alternatives for youth to remain in the juvenile system. So figuring out a reasonable alternative to replace that where a youth can remain in the juvenile justice system, I think that in itself provides an avenue that at least should give those other entities and parties, prosecutors, public defenders, attorneys, courts, judges, at least should give them pause before everybody starts sending cases over to the adult side.
What was your issue with SB-823 then? Was it just a solution that was dropped into your lap without consulting any probation officers?
Probation acts as the last stop for many people, for many kids when previous interventions have not worked or were not tried. They end up at our doorstep. And if you look at the numbers of juvenile crime, juvenile detention in California, there is no way to argue that probation has not been effective in trying to get kids back in homes, back in communities, and back on the right track for their lives. And when you're looking at a sweeping change like this, and there's no time taken to consult, hey, we need to do this, how best can we do it, or at least give us your opinion, that's just irresponsible in my mind. But this was a backroom deal that was shoved down the throats of an industry that has proved itself to be great advocates for our kids, for public safety, for the rehabilitation of our families in this state. And that's unconscionable. What it did was put us in the position where we're backed in the corner, not the legislators, not the assembly members, not the senators, not the governor's office. None of them have to make this work. I do for Del Norte County. Chief Brenneman does for Humboldt County. You go through the 58 counties of the state of California, each one of those chief probation officers, they're the ones on the hook for making sure this works. We do things like this on a regular basis. And I cannot tell you the number of hours spent discussing how to navigate through a crappy piece of legislation. Not just for how it rolled out, but even how it was written, figuring out what the holes are, because the people who wrote it don't know the juvenile justice system. So that's one of the huge issues. There's issues in how it's funded. Counties like Butte, unfortunately, higher level of users, relatively speaking, for the North State, the money that they're going to get to implement this is not sufficient for Butte Probation to be able to restructure, reorganize their facility and bring in the programs necessary for the amount of kids, the population of kids that they have to now house locally. It's not enough. Again, it works out fine for us because we're extremely low users and we end up at that small county minimum. We'll figure out how to make it work with the money we have, but there's other counties that are not in that same boat. So the funding wasn't structured appropriately.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure gets said?
At the end of the day, we'll solve the problem. We'll take the steps needed and necessary to get the best outcome for our kids that we can. Because, no matter what they've done, they're still our kids. They're from here. Their families are here. This is their home. So even with the changes that have taken place, are taking place, will continue to take place, we'll do what's necessary to try and, at least as far as probation goes, to try and achieve the best balance of outcome for both our kids, our victims, because those are our community too, and our system. And we'll do okay. We'll make missteps. But as an industry in California, as people in Del Norte County, my officers, my staff, they work their tails off to get good outcomes for all of the people involved and walk that fine line of finding justice for each party. We'll continue to do that, and I think at the end of the day, we'll be successful in it despite the challenges. But yeah, timelines, July 1st, DJJ ceases intake, and by June 30th of 2023, DJJ will be closed.
And from Redwood Voice, this has been Eleni Corcovelos.